5, but I was for 44 years.
We're back in Butte Creek.
Yeah,
Here we are, good meal.
Yeah.
A little bit of jiving back and forth. Yeah. This is an awesome church.
Gotta have a little fun. Like
Oh, no
showing
kidding.
it.
No kidding. Well, nice to see you. I have some good news. I got a surgery date.
Oh, man.
April 10th. Still a little over 5 weeks out, but I got a surgery date. Yeah. So I'm happy about that. Yeah, I'm open for that.
Hey,
Being
look,
on the wait list.
for half price, I'll go out to the truck. I got a recip saw and we can fix it right.
That's a good deal, half price.
Half price,
Yeah. Who knows what that's gonna be these days?
Reynolds with those little tools on it.
Yeah, I know. So this is supposed to be a place of edification.
yeah. Save your own money. I do take MasterCard.
That's tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, going to be talking about Moses again tonight, and God is going to force him and encourage him to face his worst fears in his life. And that's something that the Lord does for all of us. He forces us to go places that we don't want to go. Especially places that have caused trauma in our past. Now, has anyone here ever been traumatized on any level? Trauma meaning a very, very hard, difficult, debilitating situation that really hasn't left your mind.
Yes.
Yeah. And what we have a tendency to do when we've been traumatized in certain areas is we carry those thoughts with us and they create fears in us to move on or get even close like anything that happened then. Which makes sense. We're very protective. I mean, I was traumatized through my divorce. Worst thing that ever happened in my life. Guess what I'm cautious to never, ever, ever get close to? For 100,000 reasons, but see.
A woman?
I'm going to let your congregation just deal with you as they will.
What do you think we get it? He gives us the green light.
That's a perfect intro, Steve.
Now you know why they're the way they are.
Kind of punchy and
Yeah, we don't have that buffer, you know?
So, you know, whatever has caused this major trauma for me, blew out my shoulder, the pain that followed, you saw that. So I'm extra cautious and protective, and I hope I don't ever have to go there again, like ever, because I never want to hurt like that again. Yeah, I think that's pretty normal. Yet, what the Lord wants us to do, He doesn't want us to be paralyzed in any area of our life. And so what He does eventually is He allows circumstances to come our way whereby we'll learn to push through some of our old scar tissue. For example, one of my spiritual pastors, he's like a dad to me, one day he was driving up a little narrow street, and there happened to be a school on the street. And a little 8-year-old boy ran out in front of his car and he hit him. Thankfully, he didn't kill him, but the little boy had to go to the hospital. Now, that particular narrow road saved the pastor 5 miles to travel. It was a shortcut. So he was so paralyzed with fear over hitting his little child that he stopped going down that street for years and went a total of 10 miles out of the way every day to avoid the trauma that he went through. And one day the Lord kind of convicted him deep, deep in his heart. And it was as if the Lord was saying, if you ever want to work through this fear, you need to start driving down that road again. So he slowly, with great trepidation, drove down that road 1 time, 2 times, and before he knew it, he never even thought about it again. He shaved off extra miles, he shaved off time, but more than anything, he wasn't living in fear anymore. He shaved off his fear ultimately. So, my question for all of us is, what has traumatized you in the past that the Lord wants you to face and heal you from? You don't have to share that with me. But we all kind of, I'm not going there. Now, I do a divorce recovery workshop. I've done it for years. And that's not a divorce recovery workshop where we tell people how they get divorced. It's rather, so I'm not in that business, but I help people get through the trauma of the divorce. Okay. So by the time I get a group of people together and we have 2 nights, 3 nights, it's a 3-night session called Growing Through Divorce. And I get out the whiteboard and I ask them, like, no, what has hurt you the most? And what is the most debilitating to you in moving forward? And the women will say, I hate all men because they're all jerks. So I never want another man in my life. They're paralyzed because they've had a traumatic situation being married with a man. But who's to say that the Lord wants to bring a man in your life? And he doesn't want you to push away, and this might be his perfect will for your future. Like, who's to say that? Then the men speak up, and they say, well, all women are controlling. And I go, really? Yeah. So I don't ever want to be controlled anymore. Well, we all know that not all men are jerks, and for some of you that might be a revelation. But not all men are jerks, and not all women are controlling. Thank you very much. But it will keep a man paralyzed and just wanting to date and not learn how to love as Christ wants him to love a woman that he's married to. Traumatized. So similarly speaking, we have our areas where we'll never do that again, or we'll never get close to that again, or we will never trust anyone again, which are all debilitated, paralyzing aspects that the Lord wants to heal us from. Now, even with this, I'm keeping it stationary right now because when I first had this happen to me about 5 weeks ago, I had 3 different professionals say, get out of that sling as fast as you can. Well, I did that, and then they gave me exercises right away, and it made things worse because my problem was worse than they anticipated. But what I have also been told is if you have an injury of any sort, so your body's been traumatized somewhere, There's an injury, there's a wound that needs to be healed. If you keep it too protected and guarded and contained too long, such as your shoulder, you get what they call frozen shoulder, which is more painful almost than the injury itself. So they tell you to keep things moving and to do what seems unnatural to do so that you don't freeze up. When we're traumatized emotionally, spiritually, relationally, and we freeze up, things don't get better. And the Lord eventually, I'm telling you the Lord will do this. He will eventually call you to face your worst fears so that He can heal you. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So what are they? Well, okay. Tonight we're focusing on this very thing with Moses. We know that Moses was sold, or he was raised by Pharaoh after his mother taught him for 4, 5, 6, 7 years on her knee. They didn't wean children in those days for 6, 7 years. One writer said 12, if you believe that. But Moses learned about the God of his fathers on his mother's knee. I say it every time when I mention that. The communists used to say, give me a child for the first 7 years of his life and I'll have him for the rest of his life. The most powerful years in a child's life are the first 7, as far as the information they take in and how their knowledge or their motivations are cut for the rest of their lives, as far as information and what to believe. That's why Sunday school is important, and teaching our children about Jesus so they could even understand a word is significantly important. And so Moses learned from his mother that God made a promise to Abraham, their forefather, hundreds and hundreds of years in advance, that God would raise up his people and provide a place for them, a promised land for them, and he would be their God, and they would be his people. As many as the sands are for the sea, he would have a kingdom of people that would follow him and love him. And Moses' mother taught him that. Talked to him about that. Well, of course, right at that time, for hundreds of years, maybe close to 400 years, they were in Egypt. Joseph brought his family there. How many people was in Joseph's family? Remember I mentioned it last week? 70. There were 70 of them, and now there's 2 million of them. 400 years later. And Pharaoh is a narcissist. He's afraid of anyone having any power over him. Obviously, the number of their people probably outgrew, maybe even the outgrowth of the Egyptians, who knows. We know that God blessed and multiplied the growth of his people, and he's paranoid. And so he tried in multiple ways to stop the growth by killing the babies, by having the midwives throw them out anytime a boy was born. Vicious. And finally, his last ploy was to take any child, any boy under 2 and throw him in the Nile River. You know the story. Moses' mother and father have a brilliant plan of faith, and they build this basket, and they put him in the basket in the reeds. What was the basket made out of? Reeds. So it made sense to make a basket out of reeds and put him in the reeds, because they looked like the reeds, and the reeds had no problem being in water. And they knew that Pharaoh's daughter would walk by there every day. There's no doubt about it, because Moses' sister in this plan was just standing a little bit away watching the whole thing take place. her little brother in the weeds. Here comes the princess, Pharaoh's daughter, and she watches what happens. The princess had enough maternal instinct to have her heart go out to Moses and say, I want to take care of this boy. And of course, the sister runs up right at that time, we've talked about this, and says, I know who this baby's mother, I can find a mother for this baby. She says, can you find a mother for this baby? And she takes Moses right back to his and hers mother. And I say it every time because I can't get over the fact that it was the first and the last time in all of mankind's history that a mother was paid for raising her own son. God can do anything. You're struggling financially? Stop it. God can do anything to provide for us. Even something as humorous as that. So Moses is raised. He's raised as a prince. When he turns 40, we don't know if it's a story that his mother told that he remembered. We don't know if God spoke to his heart. We don't know if he talked to maybe Jews that were slaves that would trust to speak with him because he was still in Egyptian clothes and a prince. But at 40, we read that God put in his heart to be the deliverer of his people. So, one day he was out and he was watching one of his Hebrew friends being whipped and beaten. And he said, I'll not have this because God's raising me up to be the deliverer. He just didn't know that that was the wrong time. And he just didn't know that God would orchestrate what that looked like, not him. But as a prince and as a military strategist and hero, we know that by Josephus, the historian, he was a hero, a military strategist and hero. Nobody tells him anything. He's in charge. He takes control of his own reactions in life because he's a prince. And so he saw injustice being done to one of his brothers, and he looked this way and that way. He glanced this way and that way. Which way didn't he look? That way. He didn't consult with the Lord and say, is this the moment, Lord, that you want me to deliver my people? He just, out of anger, legitimate anger, I would say, took matters in his own hands, and his plan backfired. Have you ever tried, because you were tired of waiting on the Lord, to kick down God's will, kick down the door of God's will on your own? Yeah. Well, it never works. And so, we read that the next day, he saw two Jewish brothers quarreling, and he said, stop quarreling as brothers. And one of them said, are you going to do to us like you did to the Egyptian? And he had immediately panicked because people saw what happened. And they rejected him. And we read that he thought his people would recognize that he was the deliverer appointed by God. But they didn't. They rejected him. Then Pharaoh found out, and he rejected him. And Moses ran into the desert of Midian and would live there for the next 40 years of his life. And as we're going to see tonight, he was paralyzed for 40 years of rejection, of being someone important that he was no longer. And it paralyzed him, and God is going to force him to face his fears so that he can be the deliverer God said he would be in God's time. I guess a good title for this message is Doing God's Will, God's Way. It doesn't work unless it's in his time and in his way. Okay, let's look at chapter 3. This is Genesis chapter 3. A lot of fascinating stuff here, and I'll try to breeze through.
Means Exodus.
Did I say Genesis?
Yeah.
I've never, Steve, I've never pastored to a church that I've heard so much accurate direction for to keep me on track like Butte Creek Baptist Church.
They keep me straight.
Yeah, yeah.
He knows.
I love you people. Okay, this is Exodus. Did I say that? Exodus chapter 3. Well, let me just jump up quickly though. The last two verses of chapter 2 I touched on briefly. It's the last two verses of chapter 2. This is very, very important. And God heard the Israelites groaning. They were beaten. They were slaves by the Egyptians. And God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant, and God saw the people, and God knew. Now, you don't generally see God's name mentioned 4 times in 4 phrases. So there's an emphasis. Now they've been there for years. They've been mistreated for years by this time. And God's time frame to us is questionable. I think personally he runs late. But his time frame is right on the button. And for whatever the reason, the Lord said, now it's time. It's time for my people to leave Egypt and go out into, well, that was 40 years later. But he was raising Moses up to be the deliverer. Something was going to change. The time was here. And God knew it. God saw it. God remembered his promise. And God felt it. So for those of you that are paralyzed tonight, and you're wondering how long this trial is going to last, we don't have that answer, but I can tell you this. God sees what you're going through. God hears what you're praying. God remembers what he's called you for and where you're going to end up. And God knows every fiber of emotion and doubt you have. Right now. That's all he wants you to know. Okay, we can go home. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so that's the opening. It's like the curtain's been drawn, now we're into a different scene. Okay, verse 1. Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Now just a couple things here. Moses, of course, when he was rejected by his own people and rejected by the family who raised him, Pharaoh's house, was stripped of any identity or worth that he had had in his life up to that time. And we'll see that when God asks him to go back and how he responds, because you can feel it. He'd become a nobody. He had nothing to offer. He was no longer a man of means. Nobody really knows who he is, and who he claims he is, nobody believes. He's on the backside of a desert. Remember what one of the words that I've told you, what are the meanings for desert in the Bible?
To teach.
To teach. So one of the words for desert or wilderness in the Bible means to teach. Our best lessons are learned in the desert God places us in at that time. Deserts are hot. They're arid. There doesn't appear to be any growth anywhere. just a bunch of tumbleweeds, occasional patches of grass, or a palm tree every 50 miles. And in addition to all of that, and I just can't get away from this phrase, he's gone to the vice president, the vice, what do they call it in England? Not premier, but prime minister, to living in a palace. You know, when he went by in his chariot in the streets of Cairo, they bowed. Now he's on foot in the Midian desert. He sits down by a well, and you know that story. That's a cool story, romantic story. 7 of Jethro's daughters were there, and they were drawing water for the sheep, and they offered some to Moses. And some shepherds came in and started bullying the women, started getting in front of them and getting their own water, and Moses stood up. I would say this is one reaction that was blessed, and he chased all the men away. He must have been one bad dude, as they say these days. Chased all the shepherds away. These 7 beautiful women go home, they tell their father they met this shepherd, and essentially what he said is, and you left him there? Go get him! I gotta marry all 7 of you off. So they went and got Moses, they brought him back. He gives one of his daughters to Moses. They have a couple kids, and for 40 years. Now let me ask you, do you think his life for that next 40 years was difficult, complicated, easy, a relief? What do you think? What's your opinion? Huh?
Relaxing with sheep.
Yeah.
Relaxing with shame? Oh, I thought you said shame, because shame's not very relaxing. Relaxing with sheep. Relaxing. That's a good sermon title. Shame's not relaxing. Yeah. Relaxing with sheep. Stupid sheep. That we were reminded by your wife and my brother in the back last week that sheep are not very bright. Yeah.
My brother was actually a shepherd for a while. We didn't work. He lived in Lancaster, California, and he had to take care of sheep. It's a lot of work. It is not a relaxing fun job.
Yeah.
I'm not saying he doesn't have moments of relaxation, but it's work.
I think that most of the work is protecting them from wolves and a lot of other vicious animals.
Sure.
Yeah.
Bugs, big animals.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff.
Someone else? So there's no doubt there were times that for him were a lot easier. And he didn't have a lot of time to think about it. I mean, you think he thought about it. What do you think he thought about? What do you think he felt personally?
Why?
Why? Why is this happening? I was supposed to be the deliverer. What am I doing here?
He's keeping his father-in-law's sheep. So that meant he never got his own. He never had his own flock or
Yeah.
place. It was always a job for father-in-law.
Yeah, and he's only tending them. He doesn't own them. So I think he's feeling quite displaced. I mean, he's displaced anyway, geographically, but personally and emotionally, and maybe even spiritually, feeling pretty displaced.
But
Yeah.
Since his father-in-law had no sons and he married the eldest daughter when he passed away, wouldn't all that his father-in-law possessed pass to him?
Yeah, probably, I would say, yeah, that's a good point.
Well,
Yeah.
he had a lot of power when he was with Pharaoh for his family, and of course now he's herding sheep, smelly sheep. He's been
He's learning humility.
very
I remember I was a pastor of a church in Eureka almost 10 years. And I left because it was really affecting my relationship with the mother of my kids and my family. And it was a hard, that's another traumatic time. And you know, I was just busy. I was there, I came to 50 people, we'd grown, we've done a lot of stuff, constant. And now all of a sudden I'm done. And I remember we bought a little manufactured home in a place called Grants Pass, Oregon. Have you ever heard of this? Off of Upper River Road, back in the sticks. I loved it, it was beautiful. And I remember one time we were gone for 3 or 4 days. Might have been Thanksgiving. We went back to see family and friends. And when I got home, I didn't have one message from anyone left. So I went from like to nothing. Like even feeling rejected. 10 years senior pastor, not one. I've only been gone 3 months. So that's Moses. It might even be too quiet at times. So there he is. Now he's married and he's, let's continue on. So he led his father's flock, father-in-law's, to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God, Mount Sinai. What's going to happen there in 1 year to come?
He's going to lead him back there last year.
He's going to lead God's people, maybe a couple of years, lead God's people right back to the spot he's standing on right there. That is where God gives them the 10 Commandments. That is where the Lord teaches them, I believe he taught them. Is that where he taught them, Steve, to make the tabernacle? How to make the tabernacle? That is where God would establish his nation. That is where they would be forgiven for their sins. That is where they would get the 10 Commandments and know how to govern their lives now and what God's expectations were of them. Moses has no idea. And it was the furthest backside of the desert. Did Moses know God was calling him there? No. Do you know that God directs our steps sometimes and we don't even know that he's directing our steps? And then you look back and you go, Lord, you were in this the whole time. So sometimes we are exactly where God wants us, walking in the direction he's called us to walk in, and we don't even know it. And he's with us. So Moses has no idea that God's going to call him back to be the deliverer again. His promise was still there. It's now ready to become activated shortly. And so Moses goes to the backside of the desert, and the Lord's leading him all the way. Gets back there, stops at the exact place that God will meet with him and his people again, as he'll say. Go, let's read on. Verse 2, and the angel of the Lord. Anybody know what that theological term for that is? Yes?
Angelos means messenger in Greek. I don't know what it is in Hebrew.
Well, it's a theophany. It's a theological word for a visitation from God. And sometimes it's an angel, and sometimes it's the Lord Jesus Christ himself in the Old Testament. So an angel of the Lord could have been the Lord Jesus. Could have been an angel. And the angel of the Lord appeared to Moses in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. So it is known that in that part of the world there are combustible types of plants and bushes that just randomly blaze up. I mean, I heard of that in that area. But we're told that this is a fire that's not going out, nor is it a fire that's consuming. It's a divine fire. It's God's fire. And by the way, fire all through the scripture represents the presence of God. We read in Hebrews that Paul, or whoever wrote Hebrews, said our God is a consuming fire. Okay? So I was thinking about that. I thought, well, if it was a fire, just a regular fire on the side of the bush, it wouldn't take long to breeze through it. But it's a fire in the middle of the bush, which we know if a fire's in the middle of the bush, it's gone in no time. But it was God's fire. It was His presence. And look at the next verse. I never really caught this before. So Moses looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, he's talking to himself, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. So he's walking his woolly friends, and he's passing by this bush. He glances over, walks a little more, looks back. Nothing's being consumed. The same flame is there. He stops. He says to himself, I'm going to go back and check this out. Let's see what he does. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. Now we know that when God speaks in the Old Testament, and even in the New Testament, Jesus said, Martha, Martha, Peter, Peter. It's a common way of speaking. It opens the door for emphasis, but I also think it's an endearing term. Like if my daughter Christina, who's a stinker, she's 40 now, but she was a stinker when she was little, I'd say, Christina. She was the one that had this. But it's a term of endearment. I don't think there's any record that God spoke to Moses at all in that 40 years into this moment. Never heard of it. We have no record of it. I wonder if God went silent on Moses. I wonder if Moses took that as a rejection. I had my one opportunity to do what God was telling me to do, and I completely blew it. I blew my time with Pharaoh's family, although Moses, we find out, said that he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh as he got older. But just a little sidebar. Is this the first he's heard from the Lord? Moses, Moses. Now, I'm thinking that when God speaks, it can be rather thunderous. When he spoke to the children of Israel at Sinai, the mountain shook and they ran and hid. And this is a creator. When he speaks, you know it. And Moses said, he's talking to a bush. Here I am. Then he said, the Lord gives him his instruction. This is holy ground now. Do not come near. Like, this is a new day. This is a new experience. This is a new dynamic of God Moses maybe hasn't considered. He's powerful, he's loving, but he's also holy. And he says, do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for which the place you are standing is holy ground. So before we talk any further, Moses, you need to know who I am and revere me accordingly. I'm your God, I love you. I'm giving you the call of a lifetime, but I'm holy. I'm the potter, You're the clay. Never mix that up. I'm the potter, you're the clay. Moses takes off his sandals. And he's standing there. Anybody got a comment on that? Holy ground. Holiness is an ambiguous kind of word sometimes, and it's not earthly. It's a heavenly word. Anybody have a thought? It means set apart. My people are holy. We're called holy now because of Christ we're holy. We're set apart. Sanctify would be another word for it. We are special and set apart to God. God's holy. You and I, because of Christ, are holy. You may not feel like it. You are, because of Christ. Of course, there's two types of holiness and sanctification. One is instantaneous. The moment you meet Christ, you become holy. You become sanctified or holy or set apart to Him. But the second is more ongoing. Like we're growing in our holiness and we're growing in our sanctification. And that doesn't stop until you and I breathe our last. So there's kind of two parts to it. Anyhow. And so there he is. How many of you have a rule in your house where people have to take off their shoes before they come in your house? They have to take off their shoes before they come in your house.
Well, I do, but it's inconsistent. Nobody listens to me.
Nobody listens to you, so you go whatever. But anybody have a no-shoe policy? I don't know. And no. And let me ask you, Courtney. Tell me what's behind your no-shoe policy?
What's behind it?
Yeah.
Keep it clean.
Keep it clean, and you lay the floors after all. So you know, in most places, right? Yeah. Keep it clean. Holy means keep it clean. Keeping it clean. Anyone else? No-shoe policy?
Maybe it's respect, I don't know.
I think that is. There's an aspect of respect. Yeah.
We did in Alaska, that just so you didn't make everything wet.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, we did it in Utah for the same reason.
Is that a kind of a thing in Utah?
We did.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just, and it was more comfortable. I mean,
Yeah.
some of the shoes and stuff, the boots and stuff we had to wear there, you just take them off because it was just more comfortable.
Yeah. So my wife has
It's not comfy.
Oh, it's comfortable. Yeah.
Yeah.
My wife has a no-shoe policy, and sometimes I don't take off my shoes. And she says,
Medical field, that's why.
yeah, the medical field. That's right. And she says, "Do I see shoes on your feet right now?"
No, it's a.
I don't know. I'm not wearing shoes. Wow, look at that over there.
Now it comes out.
Well, I think, that's an issue of respect too. I think it is an issue of respect, especially if you don't agree with the policy, but I think it's respectful if you know it's important for someone to tell you to take their shoes off. Doesn't have to be stuffy. Doesn't have to be that they're perfectionists. The bottom line, it's their house. Take off your shoes. Anyhow, God says, take your sandals off, Moses. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I think it's both.
It's both respectful
This
and...
is a culture that works with animals, so they're out in the field with.
Oh!
And all
Yes.
the animals
Yeah.
excrete, and when you come in the house, you will take your shoes off. Both as a matter of cleanliness and as a matter of respect of this house
Yeah.
and the people that work to keep it clean.
Your name's Bill, right? Is your name Bill?
Yeah.
I knew there was something I liked about you. No,
There's a lot of it.
you come up with some of the, doesn't he have great insight on these kinds of things? I would have never thought about that. Of course. So the Lord says, I need to set a new understanding with you, Moses. I'm not just your buddy, God. I'm the creator, the all-sufficient one, your master. I love you. I'm your father. Take your shoes off. Okay, anyhow, that's another good title. Take your shoes off. Okay. Then he says, so he's called Moses. He's told them how to behave. Now he's given them the reason for this moment. 40 years later. Unexpected. Remember last week we talked about God's unexpected pain in our life? Now there's unexpected direction in our life. And sometimes the Lord moves really slow as far as His will and His plans and His changes in our life. But when He finally moves, He moves really fast. Really fast. Verse 6. And He said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. There had to be something in the purity of what God said and in the thunderous power of what God said that Moses couldn't even look at it. Now we already know that you can't look at God and be alive and live anyway. No man has ever seen God and has been alive to tell about that experience. When Moses was given the 10 Commandments, he had to turn his face away and not look at God. What's that?
Did John see in the Revelations? Saw the glory of him.
The glory of Him. Yeah, the glory of Him. So there was something about how God spoke that Moses just couldn't. He shuddered. Now the Lord says the same thing right here that we just read before we started, verse 22 and 23 in the last chapter. He says it again. Listen to this. This is the God of compassion. That His heart breaks for those that He loves who are in pain. Well, you would say, well, why don't you do something about it then, Lord? And we don't question God's timing. I mean, He can handle it, but trust means I want your timing and my time. Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. He also sees the taskmasters. He sees them, but He's saying it a second time. I think this is His way of saying, "You please hear me. I am more aware of your pain than you are. And change is coming. I don't know why He didn't do it earlier. Doesn't matter. When I injured my shoulder, within that week of time, and you saw me the last time before I went to the emergency, I was begging Jesus to take away the pain. Begging Him. And eventually I was given medication and this, and the pain subsided. And I guess I had to learn something, and here's the one thing I learned. The one thing. Because I've never had pain like that before. Never again will I judge or be impatient with someone who has chronic pain. Lord, help me never. Because now I know how it feels, just a little smidgen. I wanted to die. And so God, why does He wait? I don't know. But He wants us to learn for sure. So God says, I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and so to bring them up out of the land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And He's talking about the promised land. Now I find this very intriguing. God's going to do all the work of deliverance, but He's appointing Moses to lead the charge. So God says, I'm going to deliver them, yet He's causing Moses to be the deliverer. It reminds me of my wife Jenny. I tease her about it all the time, because she'll say something like, we need to go pull all the weeds in the backyard. And what does that always mean? You need to go pull the weeds in the backyard. We really need, and it always means me. And I say, Jenny, can you just say, would you go pull the weeds in the back of the yard? But no, it's we. And I go, why do you say we when you mean me? Because I thought of it? Maybe because she thought of it. I don't know. She's a part of the process. Anyhow, God's coming down and he's going to work in tandem with Moses. But keep in mind, God does the work. He causes the 10 plagues that we'll talk about next time I'm here. He causes the dividing of the Red Sea. He told Moses to put his staff out, but he divided the Red Sea. He caused the angel of death to go over the homes of the Hebrews and spare their 2-year-old children or their young children. Moses didn't do anything about that. So he is the deliverer. He's just going to do it through the vessel of Moses. Right? And he goes, I'm going to take you to a land of milk and honey. I mean, they weren't in the land of milk and honey there. There was like hardly anything growing there. I mean, they had sheep, so there'd be grass somewhere, but not much. But I'm going to take you to a land, which he did. That's the book of Joshua and after, where the central point of that place today, still, the land of milk and honey is Jerusalem. Israel, Jerusalem. And there are parts of that part of the world. How many of you have been there? Israel? Beautiful, stunning, gorgeous. A lot of desert, but some of the places are stunningly beautiful. It's the land of milk and honey. It's paradise. And I can read the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and I heard one pastor even say the termites. Whatever. Okay. Verse 9. He says it again. Verse 9, this is the third time that God says, I hear my people's pain. Third time. And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. 3 times he wants them to know that he knows. Now, just a little sidebar. So let's say you have a real difficulty in a relationship, or you also have been rejected, or you've been misunderstood, or you've been lied about, or charges have come against you that you were not guilty of, or you were being blamed for a divorce that you didn't cause. Total injustice. Total injustice. And you've prayed everything you could pray. You've tried to reason with the people, and they don't want to hear it. There comes a time where we just have to know that God knows. And that's as good as it gets. Now, it's a painful place to get to, but the most peaceful place when you're there. Because you don't feel betrayed and abandoned anymore. You just know that God knows. So for some of you tonight, that's all you need to know about your trial. God knows. And that must be enough. Ask him to help you get there. I ask him to help me get there. There is no validation. There is no pat on the back. There is no one that understands. God knows. Verse 10. Now he gets to Moses. Now come. I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Like you said, did you forget that I was calling you to be the deliverer? I mean, it was 40 years ago, but did you forget? Why would I not keep my word? I will send you to Pharaoh that you may bring out my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said to him, now he does this 5 times. He gives 5 reasons why he's not the man. He gives 5 reasons why God is mistaken. He needs to look elsewhere. Verse 11. Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? Like, who am I? You know, when we first got started, I said that God frequently, and I was talking specifically about men, but it's women too, Christian men and women. God calls us, and for whatever his divine reason, he dismantles us so that he can remake us. Moses is completely broken and dismantled to the point where he doesn't even know who he is anymore. Like, why would you ask me? I'm the lowest of the lowest. I've been rejected by everybody. I got ahead of you. Everything backfired. Who am I that you would even consider me? Powerful. These are reasons that he's going to give to keep him in his trauma and not move him past his fear. First of all, I don't deserve this. How would you even ask? I'm as valuable as the sheep that I lead. And God says, well, I'll be with you. I'll be with you. So those of you that are in a long-term trial, you can rest your life on that. He is with you. You may feel very alone, but you're not. Do you believe that? God, take it by faith. He's with you. I will be with you. But the Lord knew that wasn't going to be enough for Moses. He just knew it. So he gave more assurance. Look what he says after that. I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you. I got to give you a sign, Moses, to show you that what I say I mean, what I mean what I say, and what I say I mean, and I'm telling you what I'm going to do with you and my people. I will give you a sign that I have sent to you, that I have sent you. I'm going to prove to you by giving you a sign that this is me, and I'm sending you here, and I'm going to do exactly what I'm telling you to do. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, it's kind of like not if, but when. By the way, one of the things we see about the Lord in this teaching is he is persistent. You are not going to win. You're not going to win. If the Lord moves you to do something, you're not winning. You're not. It's like, not my will, but thine be done. It's probably your best way around it. Or through it, actually. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, in other words, Moses, you are doing this. Like, you can cry, you're doing the flakes, you're bringing the people out of Egypt. You shall serve God on this mountain. Like, turn around and look at that mountain behind you. See that mountain, Moses? I'm going to prove this is me leading you back to Pharaoh, because when you bring 2 million people out of Egypt, you're going to be standing right on this spot. That'll prove that I've been in this all along. You're going to serve me on this mountain. You're going to worship me. You're going to get the 10 Commandments. But there was something dastardly that happened at the mountain too. What was that? Remember?
They made a,
Golden calf?
They made a golden calf.
Yeah, it's pardon.
They partied down, they couldn't wait. They started doing Egyptian worship services.
yep,
It took all the gold that God blessed them with. As they were leaving Egypt, by the way, all the women in the homes showed them favor by giving them their gold and their silver. And so that they left with all of this gold and silver that God wanted used to build his temple, his tabernacle, his worship. So they left with all kinds of favor. And they used it to build a golden calf. Anyhow, then Moses said to God, so this is his second pushback. Second pushback. He's telling the God of the universe and his creator what he needs to know. Then Moses said to God, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What should I say to them? I mean, they have a ton of gods, by the way, the Egyptians. What if I give them your name? Jehovah, Yahweh. God means God. Then God says to Moses, tell them I am who I am. Which simply means I'm the self-existent one who is all-sufficient. I need no one else. I am creator. But my favorite definition is to be. I am means to be. So what he's saying to Moses, as we're forecasting a future of him facing his greatest fears, is Moses, from this moment on, I will be whatever you need me to be to lead you to go where I'm calling you and the people to go. I will be whatever you need me to be to fulfill my will and my purpose. Think about that. So whatever you're up against, whatever challenge you have, whatever change you're going through, whatever fear-based cloud is before you, the Lord will be for you whatever you're going to need him to be to get you through it. I just love that phrase. I am who I am, and I will be what you need me to be to take you to the promised land. I just love that verse. And he says, that's what you're to say to him. Verse 13, God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. So he's immediately taken Moses back to his promises hundreds and hundreds of years ago. He's telling him what to do now, and he's talking to him about his future. He's talking about the promise that he gave his forefathers. He's telling them what he's going to do right now to take them out of Egypt. And he's telling them what their future is in the promised land. He's the God of forever. Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I have observed you fourth time. God is letting his people know, I have seen everything you've gone through. Fourth time. I have observed you in what has been done to you in Egypt. And I promise that I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites and the termites, to the land flowing of milk and honey. And they will listen to your voice, Moses. And you and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. And now please let us go 3 days' journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. Verse 19, very interesting. But I know, God is telling Moses, but I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand, his mighty hand. And what compels him to let them go? Do you, anybody remember? The plagues. I mean, God knew how to make him cry uncle. He's the only one that really knows how to make us cry uncle. Have you ever had anybody in your life, you go like, what else do they need to go through to get it and come to Christ? Like, what else? And their bottom is usually way more bottom than we think it should be. But God knows where the bottom is. He knows. Certainly did in my life. So he's already telling Moses he's going to reject you the first time. You know the very thing that you struggle with, Moses, rejection? That's why you don't even know who you are. You've been rejected so bad. Well, I'm giving you a tip. He's going to reject you again, and this is the new Pharaoh. The other one died. But I know that this king of Egypt will not let you go unless you by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do in it. After that, he will let you go. That's exactly what happened. And I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. Imagine this, ladies. I think this is the coolest thing. And I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And when you go, you shall not go empty. But each woman shall ask of her neighbor and any woman who lives in her house for silver and gold jewelry and for clothing, and you shall put them on your sons and your daughters, so you shall plunder the Egyptians. We are going to plunder them, take all of their values, and wipe them out in the Red Sea. At least the men. Got a few more minutes. Here's his third excuse why he can't do this. He's pretty persistent himself, isn't he? Then Moses answered, but behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, the Lord did not appear to you. Now, why would he say that? They will not listen to me.
Because they didn't.
They didn't before. Moses said, I thought they would know I was the deliverer. And they didn't listen. I mean, we all know that. That would really strike fear in his heart. It's like, Lord, I already tried this. It didn't work, and you're telling me to go back. And then you're telling me he won't listen? Wow. I don't want to go through that again. Then the Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? He said, okay, let me give you another bit of hope. What is that in your hand, Moses? Well, it's a staff. And he said, throw it on the ground. So he threw it on the ground and it became a serpent, and Moses ran from it. By the way, the serpent is Egypt's symbol of power and spirituality. That's why the Pharaoh had a serpent on his, have you ever seen a Pharaoh's, whatever they call it, crown? There's a serpent there, right there. God's going to destroy their culture at that time. The politics and everything to go with it. But Moses ran. He knows a poisonous snake when he sees it. So he threw it on the ground and it became a serpent, and Moses ran from it. But the Lord said to Moses, put out your hand and catch it by the tail. Can you imagine that? Just grab the serpent by a tail. Are any women here not afraid of snakes? Would you raise your hand?
As long as I have my gun, I'm not afraid of them.
Okay, I got two here that are not afraid of snakes.
I've been in ICU, so it would seem like.
Yeah, no. How about spiders? Any women afraid of spiders?
They have eyes all over their bodies.
I'm
Okay.
definitely spider.
Okay, here we go. Okay. But the Lord said, put out your hand and catch it by the tail. So he put out his hand and caught it, and it became a staff in his hand. Solid piece of wood. Like Moses, what else do I have to show you? And they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has appeared to you. Again, the Lord said to him, put your hand inside your cloak. I'll show you something else. Moses puts it in his cloak, perfectly good shape, pulls it out, and it's fully diseased. The Bible calls it leprous. It changed colors. It became very, very white. And then God said, put your hand back inside your cloak. Puts the hand back inside his cloak, and when he took it out, it was restored like the rest of the flesh. If they will not believe you, and then God gives them another thing, and I don't want to be late here. God says, I even have one more thing if you need it. Another card for you. Take water out of the Nile, and I'll turn it into blood. And that's what he did. Moses didn't have to use that, but it was the first plague, where he turned the water into blood. And so it goes on and on and on. And then finally Moses said, oh, just one more thing. I'm not that good at speech. I stutter. I have a stuttering problem. Well, you know what Stephen said when Moses was with Pharaoh? He was a man powerful in word and speech. But I think because of his severe rejection, he lost that. And he said, I can't do it. Can you, Lord, finally send someone else? Well, that's what he wanted to ask to begin with. Can you send someone else? And it says, and that angered the Lord. And the Lord said, okay, I'll send someone else, but he's going with you. Your Aaron brother, your brother Aaron. And Aaron spoke for Moses and with Moses up until plague 3, and then Aaron drops off, and Moses gets his confidence back. His security is restored in the Lord, not in his name or title or wealth. It's in the Lord. And we'll talk about what happens after that next week. Lord, thank you for your word. It is more up to date than tomorrow's headlines. We thank you, the God of the past, the present, and the future. I pray for anyone today that really needs, they need to know, you've said it 4 times to a very, very heartbroken and pained people. You are aware of everyone's situation tonight. You are aware of everyone's hurt, frustration, hopelessness, burden. You see it, you feel it, you're aware of it. You're going to address it. I pray that you'll help all of us to trust you, to wait on you, and show us what it is we need to learn in the meantime about your love for us and your power as our God. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Blessings on you.
Thank you.
You.